The resignation letter sat on Diane Walker's desk like a loaded gun. 2 sentences. My signature at the bottom. 7 years of loyalty reduced to 12-point Times New Roman on a single sheet of paper. Diane stared at it like the paper had personally insulted her. She picked it up slowly. Read it twice. Then set it back down and looked at me the way people look when they have suddenly run out of script. You can't be serious, she said. I looked her straight in the eye. I have never been more serious in my life. Before I tell you what happened in the 3 hours before that letter landed on her desk, subscribe to Alex's Revenge and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Because this story is about loyalty, about betrayal, and about the quiet, devastating power of knowing when to walk away. But to understand why I put that resignation letter on Diane Walker's desk, you need to understand what she said in that conference room. And to understand that, you need to understand the 7 years that came before it. My name is Raymond Hutchinson. Ray. To most people, I am 58 years old. And for nearly a decade, I gave Summit Construction Group everything I had left to give. Nights, weekends, phone calls I took at the dinner table when there was still someone sitting across from me. Missed birthdays I promised I would not miss and somehow missed anyway. I told myself it was worth it every single time. I told myself sacrifice now meant stability later. That the longer I stayed and the harder I worked, the more secure everything would eventually become. Summit was not just a job for me. It was the place I went when grief had nowhere else to put itself. My wife Sarah died 7 years before any of this happened. Cancer. It moved fast. The way cancer does when it wants to remind you that the universe does not ask for your permission. 10 months from the first diagnosis to the funeral, 1 year we were arguing about whether to repaint the kitchen cabinets. The next, I was standing beside a closed casket with our son's hand in mine, trying to remember how to breathe without her in the room. Lucas was 11 when we buried his mother. That was the age when a boy still needs someone at the dinner table asking about his homework, his baseball practice, his bad dreams. The small things that kids pretend do not matter, but absolutely do. I was drowning in medical bills, mortgage payments, and insurance forms with numbers I could barely look at without my hands going cold. Every month felt like another wall closing in from a different direction. So I did what men who do not know how to grieve tend to do. I worked. I told myself it was survival. I told myself that if I stayed late enough, drove far enough, solved enough problems no one else wanted to touch, then one day it would all mean something. One day the house would be fully safe. One day Lucas's medical school would be paid for. One day I would have enough breathing room to sit across from my son at the kitchen table without watching the clock. But one day kept moving forward every time I got close. I missed Lucas's sophomore award ceremony because a concrete pour in Tucson got delayed and no one else knew the superintendent's direct line. I forgot his 17th birthday until Diane sent me a text about a union complaint and I happened to see the date on my phone. I still remember walking into the kitchen at 10:46 that night, holding a grocery store, cupcake, and a birthday candle I found in the junk drawer. Lucas was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a textbook open in front of him. He smiled when he saw me. That was the worst part. He smiled like he already understood, like he had quietly decided somewhere along the way not to ask too much from me. Not because he did not want more, but because he had already learned that wanting more out loud would only make me feel worse. Every time guilt hit me like that, I made the same quiet promise to myself. This is temporary. This is what sacrifice looks like. This is how I protect him. And Summit became the place where I buried all of it. The grief, the loneliness, the years I could never reclaim. I gave Diane Walker my nights, my weekends, my professional reputation, and nearly a decade of loyalty, because I believed loyalty still meant something in that building. Because I believed that people who noticed the work would eventually find the courage to reward it. Then Ashley Parker got my promotion. And in one conference room, with one smiling announcement, I understood that Summit had never seen my sacrifice as loyalty. They had seen it as availability. 6 months before the announcement, Diane stopped me in the hallway like it was a routine conversation. "Hey, Ray," she said, holding a manila folder against her chest. "Just a heads up. My niece starts next week. Fresh out of business school. She wants to get a feel for how things actually work on the operations side. She will be shadowing you for a while." I should have heard the warning buried inside that sentence. I did not. I nodded and said, "Sure. Send her my way." At the time, I figured Ashley Parker would be another temporary office hire with clean shoes and big ideas and absolutely no idea what a job site in Arizona felt like in July. I assumed she would follow me around for 2 weeks. Realized that construction was not all glass offices and ribbon cuttings. Then quietly drift towards some role where she could write strategy documents without ever stepping over rebar. Then she walked in. 26 years old. Designer jeans without a wrinkle. White blouse that somehow survived a Phoenix morning without wilting. Perfume strong enough to announce her before she rounded the corner. She held out a perfectly manicured hand and smiled at me like she had practiced it in a mirror. "You must be Ray," she said. "I heard you are the operations guru around here." It sounded respectful, but there was something underneath it. A steadiness in her eyes that was not curiosity. More like patience. Like she was not asking to learn from me. She was waiting for the appropriate amount of time to pass before I handed her the keys. I trained her anyway, because that was my job. Because I genuinely believe knowledge is meant to be passed down. Because I thought helping her would make me more valuable, not more replaceable. I showed Ashley how to read structural drawings, how to check soil reports, how to speak to city inspectors without sounding like you were begging, how to calm down a furious contractor without surrendering the entire project budget. I walked her through OSHA paperwork, union call procedures, safety log requirements, permit deadline sequences, and the small, quiet problems that could turn into million-dollar disasters if nobody caught them before they compounded. She took notes. She asked good questions. She smiled at Diane every time we passed the corner office. And I never once recognized that every lesson I gave her was another brick in the staircase she was building to climb over me. 2 weeks before the announcement, I finally saw the truth. It was a Thursday evening, a little past 9. The Summit office had gone quiet in that specific way construction offices do after hours. When the phones stop but the building still hums with something unfinished. Fluorescent lights buzzed above my desk. The janitor's cart rattled down the hallway somewhere behind me. Outside the window. The yard was dark except for the security lights hanging over stacks of rebar and idle machinery. I was still at my desk because of a mistake Ashley had made earlier that week. She had signed off on a scaffold inspection without verifying the load-bearing connections. A welder caught the problem before anyone climbed it. One loose connection. One bad assumption from someone too new to know the difference between a completed checklist and an actual completed inspection. That was all it ever takes to turn a normal workday into a tragedy. So I stayed, reviewing safety protocols for the Tucson hospital expansion, rewriting notes that Ashley should have absorbed months earlier. My back hurt. My coffee had gone cold. But I told myself the same thing I always did. Fix it now. Prevent the disaster. Keep moving. Then I heard voices from Diane's office. Her door was cracked open, not wide enough to see inside, but enough for every word to carry down the empty hallway. Still, no decision on the VP position, a man asked. I recognized the voice immediately. Victor Brennan, one of Summit's senior investors. Old school, blunt. The kind of man who actually understood what field operations cost when they went wrong. Diane laughed softly. Ray is reliable, she said, but he does not have executive presence. My hand stopped moving over the keyboard. Reliable. That was the word people used when they wanted your labor, but not your leadership. The word that meant we are comfortable with what you produce, but uncomfortable with what you might become. Victor answered, Ray is the reason half your projects do not collapse. For 1 second, I thought Diane might agree. She said, he is good in the field, but Ashley has the MBA. She understands where the market is going. And she is family. Family. That word did not land like an insult. It landed like a verdict. Not because I hated Ashley. Not because I believed titles were owed instead of earned. But because in that one sentence, Diane made 7 years of work simply disappear. The calls I took at midnight. The city meetings I drove 3 hours round trip to attend. The union disputes I resolved before they became strikes. The safety disasters I stopped before anyone ever knew they had been close to happening. None of it had mattered in the way I needed it to matter. I pushed my chair back slowly, careful not to make a sound. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. A crane sat motionless in the darkness like a steel skeleton waiting for morning. My reflection stared back from the glass. Older than I expected. Jaw tight. Eyes carrying something I finally decided to stop ignoring. I was not the future of Summit. I was the man keeping the place upright until Diane's chosen future was ready to occupy my chair. The next afternoon, when Diane made her announcement, I sat in that conference room with my hands flat on the table and watched everyone applaud. Ashley smiled and thanked Diane. She thanked the team. She did not look at me. I did not applaud. I thought about Lucas at 11 years old, holding my hand beside his mother's casket. I thought about the grocery store cupcake. I thought about all the dinners I had eaten alone at my desk while telling myself it was worth it. Then I thought about Victor Brennan, who had called me 3 months earlier just to say he had watched my work for a long time and that if I was ever ready for a conversation, his door was open. At the time, I had thanked him politely and let it pass. That evening, I called him back. The meeting with Greg Brennan happened the next day. His office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Phoenix that looked nothing like Summit. No cracked parking lot. No diesel smell drifting through the vents. No burned coffee sitting in a pot older than half the staff. Greg met me at the elevator in a gray suit and scuffed work boots. He shook my hand once. Firm and direct. "Ray Hutchinson," he said. "Took you long enough." He led me into a corner office with site maps covering one full wall and a whiteboard crowded with deadlines, budgets, and inspection notes. He sat on the edge of his desk and got to the point without preamble. "We have wanted you here for over a year." I waited for the catch. It never came. "You have the network, the field experience, and the one thing money cannot buy," he said. "People trust you." He slid a folder across the desk. Vice President of Operations. $180,000 annually. Performance incentives. Equity after the first year. Start date in 3 weeks. I stared at the number for a moment. $60,000 more than Summit had ever paid me. "This is not charity." "Ray," Greg said, "you bring value. Contractors pick up when you call. City inspectors know your name. Clients take your word. We are not hiring an employee. We are hiring 20 years of reputation." I looked up at him. For the first time in a very long time. I did not feel like I was trying to prove I belonged in the room. That evening, I typed 2 sentences. I printed them, and I signed my name at the bottom. The next morning, I walked into Diane's office and placed the letter on her desk. She was still glowing from the announcement. That's smooth. Victoria's smile that people wear when they believe the game is already decided. She looked up, saw the paper, read it once, read it again, then looked at me like I had handed her something in a language she did not speak. "You can't be serious," she said. "I have never been more serious in my life." She stood slowly, palms out, voice softening into something she probably thought sounded like concern. "Okay, let's not make emotional decisions here. I know the announcement surprised you. Surprised me. Like Betrayal was just a scheduling miscommunication. I am not being emotional," I said. "I am being clear." Diane came around the desk. The tone shifted, something more urgent now. Underneath the professional composure, "Ray, you have built something here. Your reputation means something at Summit. You have responsibilities. Lucas is in college. You still have the house. Bills. Walking away right now would be risky. There it was. Not appreciation. Leverage. She was not reminding me of my life because she cared about it. She was cataloging every anchor she thought would keep me from leaving. We can create a new title, she said quickly. Senior Director of Site Operations. Same compensation for now. A raise review in 6 months. You would technically report to Ashley, but you would still have full influence over the field teams. I almost laughed. She wanted me to absorb the insult. Continue doing the work. Protect the projects. And smile while reporting to the woman who had taken my chair. No, I said. Diane blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Her expression hardened. If you leave this way, I cannot control what people hear about it. I looked at her for a long moment. I am not burning a bridge. Diane, I am walking off one before it collapses. Then, I turned, opened the door, and left without slamming it. Monday morning, Ashley Parker looked like the title had already started eating her alive. I walked into Summit at 7:12 with coffee in one hand. Normally, Ashley arrived looking polished enough for a real estate magazine. That morning, her hair was pulled back too tight. Her blouse had a wrinkle she had not noticed. And both of my monitors were buried under spreadsheets she clearly did not understand. Ray, she said the second she spotted me. Do you have a minute? I looked at the screens. Red cells everywhere. Permit deadlines. Budget notes. Compliance flags. 3 different project tabs open and bleeding into each other. What is wrong? I asked. I think Glendale has a permit issue, she said, clicking too quickly through tabs. The contractor said we still had time. But this federal compliance thing is showing overdue. And I do not know if that is connected to drainage or... That is not Glendale, I said. She stopped. That is Mesa. Her face changed. What? The federal compliance deadline for Mesa was Friday. You missed it. She stared at the screen like the numbers might rearrange themselves if she looked frightened enough. How bad is it? $50,000 in penalties if the extension does not go through, I said. 2-week delay for resubmission if the city rejects the correction. She whispered, Oh my God. I pulled a chair over and spent 40 minutes finding the original application, correcting the drainage specifications, calling the city office, and talking a clerk into reviewing the extension request before close of business. Ashley stood behind me, taking notes with shaking hands. And that was only the first fire of the day. By noon, my phone had 4 missed calls from clients. The hospital expansion client wanted to know why Ashley had emailed a revised timeline without consulting the engineering team. The Flagstaff client said, with no particular politeness, that they were not in the business of teaching someone on a $40 million build. A highway superintendent called to tell me, flatly, that Ashley did not know what a slump test was. By 3 o'clock, Diane's assistant appeared at my desk. Diane wants to see you. Of course she did. Diane's office door closed hard behind me. Ashley sat in the corner, pale and quiet. Diane stood at the window with her arms crossed like she was bracing against something. I have been getting calls, Diane said. Clients are confused. They think you are leaving. They know I am leaving because I gave notice. You are poisoning the pipeline. No, I said. They are worried because you handed their projects to someone they do not trust yet. Her jaw tightened. Are you trying to take my clients? I have not solicited anyone. I have not made a single promise. But trust does not transfer because you announce a title in a conference room. The room went quiet. I looked at Ashley. You need to learn the permit pipeline, not just the deadlines, the reasons behind them, and stop assuming site supervisors will catch every mistake before it becomes expensive. Ashley nodded without looking up. Diane said nothing, because deep down, she already knew the truth. Ashley had the title, but the work was still bigger than her. And none of us knew yet that in less than 8 months, that gap would cost Summit everything. The email from Greg Brennan came in at 3:47 that same afternoon. Subject line, "Let's talk. Ray, got your resume. I have been wondering when you would finally call. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. No corporate softening. No, we will keep your information on file. Just a door opening." The next day, I drove into downtown Phoenix with my resignation still fresh enough to feel like a risk. Greg met me at the elevator. I will skip past the meeting details because I already told you the outcome. $180,000. Vice President of Operations. Equity after the first year. I accepted before I drove home. That evening, I told Lucas the truth in a diner off University Drive. Not because I had planned it that way. Not because I had a speech prepared. I told him because he looked at me across that cracked vinyl booth with his mother's eyes and made lying feel physically impossible. He was 19, pre-med at Arizona State, running on too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Organic chemistry notes poked out of his backpack. Fries sat cooling between us on the table. He had that serious line around his mouth that Sarah used to get whenever she knew I was avoiding the point. "Are you going to tell me what is going on?" he said. "Or do I have to guess? And before I tell you what I said, take a second to subscribe to Alex's Revenge. If someone has ever used your loyalty against you, tell me in the comments what you would have done." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, even though it had gone lukewarm 20 minutes earlier. "I quit my job," I said. Lucas stopped mid-fry. For 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. The diner kept going around us like my life had not just shifted position across the table. A waitress laughed near the counter. Dishes rattled in the kitchen. Somewhere behind me, an old man argued with someone about his eggs. Lucas set the fry down. "What?" "I put in my notice yesterday. Last day is next Friday." His face changed in the specific way that made my chest tighten. He was trying to stay calm, trying to be grown about it. But I could see the math running behind his eyes. Tuition, rent, medical school applications, the mortgage, all the numbers a 19-year-old should not have to carry, but somehow had learned to measure. "Dad," he said quietly. "Why?" So I told him, not every detail. Not the part where Diane used his name as leverage while trying to talk me out of leaving. Not the part where I sat in my truck afterward wondering if I had just dismantled the safest thing we had. But I told him enough. Ashley's promotion. 7 years of being passed over for someone who had been there 3 months. The realization that I had spent an entire season training the person they had already decided would replace me. Lucas listened without interrupting, which meant he was scared. When I finished, he stared at his plate and asked the one question I had been bracing for. "What about money?" "I have another job," I said quickly. "Brennan Infrastructure. Better title, better pay. 3 weeks. His shoulders dropped like he had been holding his breath for an hour. "Okay," he said. "That is good." Then he looked at me again. And underneath the relief, there was something else. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "I did not want you to worry. I am 19. Dad? Not 9. I had nothing for that. He picked up a fry and put it back down again. "Mom would have told you to leave years ago." That landed harder than anything Diane had said. Because he was right. Sarah always knew when loyalty had turned into a form of self-destruction. And somehow, without either of us noticing, our son had learned it too. My final week at Summit felt like walking through a building whose foundation had already cracked. Nothing had collapsed yet, but everyone could feel the walls settling. People got quiet when I entered rooms. Conversations stopped in the hallway. Project managers who used to complain to me openly about delays and budgets now looked at me like they wanted to say something, but were not sure who was in charge of the permission. A few did come by. Quiet handshakes. Short, honest words. One superintendent from Tucson slapped the side of my cubicle on Wednesday afternoon and said, "Place won't be the same without you." "Ray?" I nodded. There was not much else to say. Diane stayed in her office most of the week. Ashley did not. She came to my desk 3 or 4 times a day with legal pads full of half-finished notes and questions she should have learned months earlier. The Tucson contractor wants clarification on rebar specs. Structural drawings. Page 14. I told her, do not guess. Read. The city inspector needs updated safety protocols. Shared drive. OSHA compliance folder. Newest revision. The union rep called about a scheduling conflict. Call him back. She looked at me each time like she expected more. That is your job now. I said. I could have made the transition harder. I could have let her walk into every mistake blind. I could have smiled, packed my box, and watched Summit slowly bleed from all the cuts I had been quietly stitching for years. But that was not who I was. There were real workers on those sites. People with families, backs, hands, and futures that mattered more than my pride. On Friday, at 4:17, Ashley stopped by my desk one last time. I know this is strange, she said, but thank you for training me, for not making it worse. I looked at her for a moment. You have the title now, I said, but you do not have the respect. Respect comes from showing up when things go wrong, knowing more than anyone expects, and protecting the people doing the actual work. She swallowed. She nodded. At 5 o'clock exactly, I packed one cardboard box, a coffee mug Lucas had given me, my safety manuals, a framed photograph of Sarah, the one where she was laughing at something just outside the frame, from a Sunday afternoon when we still thought we had infinite Sundays left. 20 years of construction work, one cardboard box. Then I walked out. No speech, no slammed door, no looking back. 3 weeks later, I walked into Brennan Infrastructure Partners with a new badge, a new title, and something I had almost forgotten how to carry. Possibility. Greg Brennan did not give me a welcome speech. He did not walk me through corporate orientation videos made by people who had never stood near wet concrete. He shook my hand, walked me into a conference room with 3 project boards covering the wall, and pointed at each one. Scottsdale Hospital expansion, Tucson Highway overpass, Albuquerque commercial build. They're yours. Then he looked me in the eye. Don't mess them up. I almost laughed. Not because it was harsh, because it was honest. At Summit, I had spent years carrying responsibility while begging for authority. At Brennan, Greg handed me both on the first morning. No games. No family politics. No junior shadow waiting behind me with a cleaner title and none of the scars. The office was smaller than Summit's, but sharper. People asked direct questions and expected direct answers. When I told the Scottsdale team, the hospital timeline needed to be rebuilt from the ground up, nobody rolled their eyes. When I flagged a materials supplier in Albuquerque for cutting corners on load specs, Greg backed me in front of the finance team without blinking. They listened. That was the first difference. The second was that they acted. Within my first month, we replaced 2 underperforming subcontractors and renegotiated a delayed steel delivery that had been stalling the Tucson overpass for 3 weeks. By the 3rd month, the Scottsdale Hospital expansion was 4 days ahead of schedule. By the 5th, the Tucson overpass cleared inspection on the first submission. By the 8th, the Albuquerque client was already asking Brennan to price phase 2. Nobody called me a miracle worker. Nobody had to. They just gave me room to do what I've been doing all along. Contractors picked up when I called. City inspectors responded to my emails within the day. Union reps who used to argue with Summit as a reflex sat across from me and said, Ray, if you are running this, we can make it work. That kind of trust does not come from a title on a business card. It comes from years of showing up before sunrise, standing in heat that makes the air waver above the asphalt, and telling people the truth even when the truth costs money. For the first time in a long time, I stopped feeling like I was trying to prove I belonged somewhere. At Brennan. I did not fight for respect. I had already earned it before I walked through the door. 8 months after I left Summit, Greg walked into my office holding a rolled magazine. He did not say anything. He dropped it on my desk and tapped the cover twice, then sat in the chair across from me and waited. It was Southwest Construction Weekly, the kind of trade publication every major firm in the region pretended not to care about but secretly read before Monday morning meetings. I looked at the headline, Summit Construction Faces Federal Probe After Safety Disaster. For a moment, the office went completely still. Then I saw the photograph underneath the headline. Ashley Parker stood behind a press conference podium, pale and rigid, her mouth slightly open like she had been caught mid-sentence in an excuse nobody was willing to accept. Camera flashes hit her face from 3 directions. Reporters shouted questions she had no answers for. For the first time in all the months I had known her, nobody in that room cared about her MBA, her last name, or Diane Walker's protection. Diane stood behind her with no smile and no posture. She looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen her. I picked up the magazine and started reading. The incident occurred at the Mesa Hospital project. A scaffold collapsed during the morning work window. One man fell 3 stories before emergency crews arrived on site. His name was Miguel Vasquez, 43 years old, married, 3 children. The kind of man who probably packed his lunch before sunrise and kissed his family goodbye and trusted, the way workers trust, that the people responsible above him had done their jobs. They had not. OSHA's preliminary findings were not gentle. Multiple safety violations. Missing load verification records. Inspection logs signed off by Ashley Parker without proper field review. I had to stop reading for a moment, because I had seen that exact failure before, months before she got the title. Ashley had signed off on a scaffold connection without verifying the load requirements. A welder caught it that time. I fixed it quietly. I retrained her, documented the correction, and made sure the mistakes stayed contained. Back then, it was a near miss. That time, I was not there. Miguel survived. The article said he would never work construction again. Broken back, shattered pelvis, permanent nerve damage. A 43-year-old man whose body had paid for a signature Ashley Parker had given without understanding what it meant. Federal fines were projected at $2 million. Project losses at $8 million. The board had already forced Diane out. Ashley resigned the day after the press conference. I set the magazine down. Greg sat across from me, arms folded. They called you just a field guy, he said. I looked at the headline one more time. No, I said quietly. I was the person keeping field mistakes from becoming funerals. Karma did not arrive at Summit like lightning. It arrived like an invoice. Line by line, fine by fine, client by client, project by project. The $2 million OSHA penalty was the first number everyone discussed. But it was only the beginning. $8 million in project losses, emergency legal consultations, safety audits, delayed permits requiring re-review, the kind of reputational damage that no press release can repair because it is written into every trade publication, every industry contact, every contractor who answers the phone and already knows the story. But numbers were the easy part. The real collapse happened when people stopped trusting Summit. By the end of that week, Diane Walker was gone. The board called it a leadership transition because organizations prefer clean language for ugly endings. But everyone in the industry understood what it meant. Diane had bet the company's future on family loyalty over field competence. And a man named Miguel Vasquez had paid for that bet with his spine. Ashley resigned the following morning. No farewell email. No announcement about her next chapter. Just a quiet resignation and a name that would precede her into every room she entered for years. I did not celebrate any of it. That surprised me. Honestly, there was a smaller version of me that had imagined this moment during long drives home from job sites. The moment when Diane would finally understand what I had been carrying. when the industry would see that the so-called field guy had been the one keeping the whole operation from cracking, I had imagined some version of satisfaction arriving when that moment came. It did not, because the proof came in the form of a hospital bed, a permanent disability, and 3 kids whose father would never climb scaffolding again. Whatever bitterness I still carried turned into something closer to shame. Not for what I had done, but for how much I had quietly endured while telling myself the situation would eventually correct itself. Consequences came, though. Phil, a senior project manager at Summit, called me before lunch. "Ray," he said, voice low. "Are you hiring? This place is done." 2 contractors reached out the same afternoon. Both had worked alongside me for years. Both said the same thing in different words. They trusted Brennan because I was there now. Then the clients began to move. The Flagstaff Highway project asked if Brennan could absorb their remaining work. A commercial developer from Mesa requested a meeting. A hospital expansion client wanted contingency pricing by Friday. I forwarded every message to Greg without adding a word of commentary. No gloating. No speeches. No revenge tour. Greg read through the list slowly, then leaned back in his chair with a small, quiet smile. "You didn't burn the bridge," he said. "You just let everyone see which side was still standing." By the end of that month, Brennan had hired 2 of Summit's most experienced people and secured 3 former Summit clients worth nearly $60 million in new contracts. Diane lost the company she had been protecting. Ashley lost the shortcut she never should have been handed. Summit lost the trust that had taken me 7 years to build. Piece by piece. One solved problem at a time. And I finally understood something I had been too close to see before. Sometimes the most complete form of revenge is not what you do to people. Sometimes it is simply what happens when you stop protecting them from the truth. That evening, while the industry was still processing what had happened to Summit, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was Lucas. I stared at his name on the screen for a moment. After everything that day, every headline, every call from former Summit clients, every reminder that I had walked out of that building just before the roof came down, his name pulled me back to the only thing that had ever actually mattered. I answered on the second ring. "Hey, kid." "Dad," he said, and there was something different in his voice. Not worry. Not the careful steadiness he used when he was trying not to alarm me. Something lighter. I got my MCAT score back. I sat up straight. And 517. I did not know the scale. I did not know the percentile or where that number put him in any admissions office's ranking system. But I knew my son's voice. I knew the way he was trying to sound calm, while every part of him wanted to abandon the performance entirely. "That's good," I asked. He laughed. And for the first time all day, something in my chest finally loosened. "Yeah, Dad, that's really good." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For years, medical school had been the number that lived in the back of every quiet moment. $60,000 a year. 4 years minimum. Application. Interviews. Living expenses. Books. Licensing fees. I had built entire nights of private anxiety around that math. At Summit, every time I thought about leaving, I would picture Lucas opening an acceptance letter that I could not afford to help him act on. But sitting in my office at Brennan, with a real title and real pay, and a team that had already learned to trust me, the number did not look impossible anymore. "We will make it work," I said. He went quiet. "You mean that?" "I mean it. You focus on getting in. I will handle the rest." There was a pause long enough for me to hear the faint noise of campus life somewhere behind him. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," he said. I looked at the framed photograph of Sarah on my desk, the one where she was laughing at something just outside the frame, and for the first time in a very long time, I believed she would have agreed. 3 weeks after Lucas got his score, I saw Ashley Parker in a diner on the west side of Glendale. The kind of place I used to stop at after city meetings back when my entire life seemed to happen in the space between job sites and bad coffee. Neon sign outside, fighting death one flicker at a time. Inside, the air smelled like bacon grease and old vinyl. I was tired, dusty from a site visit that had gone 2 hours long, and halfway through checking emails when I heard a voice 2 tables over that I recognized. Wait. So the load rating changes if the base plates are not level. I looked up. Ashley sat alone with blueprints spread across the table. A construction management textbook was open beside a legal pad covered in dense notes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No designer blouse. No polished heels. No fragrance announcing her arrival from across the room. She was wearing work boots. Rialons. Scuffed toes. Grime along the soles. The kind of boots that had actually walked through mud, gravel, and wet concrete. I almost did not recognize her. Then she looked up and saw me. Her face went pale, then red. "Ray," she said softly. I stood there a moment with my coffee, deciding whether to nod and keep walking. Part of me wanted to, not out of hatred, but because some chapters do not need to be reopened just because life places them in the same room at the same time. But then I looked at the notes in front of her. Load calculations, soil mechanics, OSHA procedures, permit sequencing, the real material, the hard material, the thing she had once treated as background noise while waiting for the corner office. "What is all this?" I asked. She glanced down. "Night classes." I raised an eyebrow. "Construction management. 3 nights a week. And I am working days as a junior coordinator at a small firm in Tempe." "Junior coordinator." She nodded. "Bottom rung. Document control. Document control. Document control. Document control. Document control. Document control. Duck. 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 Site meeting notes. Submittals. Coffee runs when nobody else wants to do them." There was no bitterness in her voice. That surprised me. Learning from the ground up this time, I asked. She swallowed, trying to. The diner went quiet around us. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it for a moment. I thought about the conference room. The applause. Diane's smile. Ashley's awkward wave after accepting the job I had earned. I thought about the worker in Mesa. Miguel Vasquez, 43 years old, 3 children, a man whose life had been permanently rewritten because people in authority had confused confidence with competence. Ashley touched the edge of her textbook. "I thought the MBA was enough," she said. "I thought if I sounded smart in meetings, the rest would follow. I thought people like you were just being difficult when you slowed decisions down." I said nothing. She looked up at me, and this time there was nothing practiced in her eyes. "I was wrong," she said, "about all of it." She stared at her notes like the paper might forgive her before the people who mattered could. "I think about him every day," she said. "I did not have to ask who. I don't know how to live with that." She whispered, for the first time since I had known her. There was no boardroom composure, no strategic calm. Just a young woman standing under the full weight of a mistake she could not delegate away, could not rewrite in an email, could not correct with a better title and a more careful explanation. I slid into the booth across from her. "You start by not making it about you," I said. She looked up. "That guilt matters only if it changes what you do next. Feeling bad does not rebuild a man's spine. Regret does not pay his mortgage. Grief does not give his kids back the version of their father they had before." Her eyes filled, but she held my gaze. "Then what do I do?" "You learn. For real this time. You stay at the bottom until you understand why every signature carries weight. You stop chasing rooms you have not earned yet. And you go see Miguel. Not through lawyers. Not through a prepared statement. You sit across from him and his family. If they allow it, and you tell the truth without asking anything in return. She might hate me," Ashley said. "She has a right to. The words landed hard. They needed to. I stood and left enough bills on the table to cover both checks. Everyone deserves a second chance. I said, but not everyone deserves to start at the top of it. You were handed a title before you had earned the ground beneath it. Do not make that mistake again. Ashley nodded slowly. I am sorry. Ray? I looked at her for a long moment. I believe you. I said, now become someone that apology can belong to. Forgiveness was not mine to hand out that afternoon. Accountability was, and I had done what I could with it. Then I walked out into the Arizona heat. Not feeling victorious. Not feeling cruel. Not feeling any of the emotions I might have imagined feeling when I pictured this moment during all those long drives home from Summit. Just finished. My phone buzzed before I reached the truck. I pulled it from my pocket. Expecting a contractor. A client update. Something that needed a decision before sunset. It was Lucas. Got my first acceptance letter. I stopped walking. The heat pressed against my back. Cars moved through the intersection beyond the diner parking lot. The neon sign flickered behind me. I read those 5 words again. Then a second text arrived. University of Arizona College of Medicine. Interview next month. Dad. I think this is really happening. I read it 3 times. For years. Medical school had been the mountain I kept calculating the distance to in the back of my mind. Sarah's dream for him. Lucas's dream for himself. My promise. Whispered quietly over unpaid bills and late-night spreadsheets and empty dinners, I kept telling myself were temporary. I had spent so long measuring how to afford his future that I had almost forgotten to be present for the moment when that future actually began. I called him immediately. Dad, he answered. I could hear the smile in his voice even through the phone. I am proud of you, I said. A short pause. The kind Lucas took when emotion got too close to the surface, and he was not sure which direction to let it go. Thanks, he said softly. That means a lot. I stood in that parking lot holding the phone like it was something I was afraid of dropping. For 7 years I had believed that being a good father meant staying at Summit no matter what it cost me. I had convinced myself that sacrifice meant swallowing disrespect, missing dinner, answering calls after midnight, and pretending I was building security while the people above me built a future for someone else. I had been wrong about that. Sometimes protecting your family means walking away from the place that is quietly breaking you. When I got home that evening, Lucas's car was already in the driveway. The porch light was on. Through the kitchen window, I could see him pulling takeout menus from the drawer the way he used to when he was small, and Sarah let him choose Friday dinner. I sat in the truck for a moment. Looking at the house I had nearly sacrificed everything to keep. Looking at the light in the kitchen window, the ordinary warmth of it. The way it looked exactly the way home is supposed to look when you have been outside in the cold long enough. Then I went inside. Thai or Italian, Lucas asked without turning around. Your choice, I said. He grinned over his shoulder. Thai. Obviously. We ordered too much food. As we always do. And we ate at the kitchen table, surrounded by paper containers. His college notes spread at one end. And the quiet kind of happiness that does not need a speech to feel real. We talked about his interview, about the Brennan projects, about his mother, because we do that now. Because we finally learned that saying her name does not make the grief heavier. It just keeps her in the room with us. For the first time in years, I was not sitting at that table thinking about what Summit had taken from me. I was thinking about what I had built after I left. I used to believe that loyalty meant staying until the people around you finally valued what you brought. I used to think that sacrifice was supposed to be visible. That if I endured enough, someone in authority would eventually look up from their priorities and recognize mine. Now I know better. Loyalty to the wrong people is not virtue. It is just a slow way of teaching them that your time has no limit and your dignity has no floor. The day I put that resignation letter on Diane Walker's desk was not the day I gave up. It was the day I finally stopped giving my life to people who were only going to notice me after I was gone. And if this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed quiet and gathered proof the way Ray did? Or would you have confronted them the moment you heard Diane's voice through that cracked office door? Have you ever had someone underestimate you, use you, or take something that was yours, only to watch them face the consequences they had been carrying toward all along? Tell me your story below. Subscribe to Alex's Revenge for more stories about betrayal, loyalty, survival, and the kind of quiet justice that changes everything. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply leave.